Bitcoin, the future of money. How do you navigate this revolution? Join the biggest Bitcoin only event. 3 days, top speakers, cutting edge learning, network with thousands of Bitcoiners. Build your Bitcoin future at BTC Prague. Since 2007, at some point, I became convinced there was a way to do this without any trust required at all. And I couldn't resist to keep thinking about it. Satoshi Nakamoto. Welcome to What is Your Bitcoin Story podcast with your host Gigi, and in this episode, we're thrilled to have Maya join us. Maya leads Daedalus Labs with a transformative vision for society, dedicated to fulfilling Bitcoin's promise. Her boundless energy and expertise in capital markets are set to drive real change. Additionally, Maya is the presidential candidate for Suriname, bringing her leadership and vision to the forefront of global discourse. Join us as Maya shares her unique insights, experiences, aspirations within the realm of Bitcoin. From her journey to her vision for the future, this promises to be an enlightening conversation you won't want to miss. Tune in as we unravel Maya's Bitcoin story only on What is Your Bitcoin Story podcast. Welcome to the show, Maya.
Thank you for having me, Gigi.
You're very welcome, and it's a pleasure that we could make it happen. That there was some difficulties that got in the way, but after rescheduling, here we are. Even though we're still having some technical, so to say, firewall issues with webcams, but we can't spare any time, and we're doing it right raw off the phone. So, yeah, I'm really happy to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, unfortunately, my browsers don't seem to be working along today, so I'll get that fixed.
I think someone doesn't want us to have this conversation, so they're blocking the interferences. But us Bitcoiners, we always find a way, right?
Yeah, Google doesn't like us apparently.
No, Alphabet is definitely not orange pill. They like their monopoly. They like their control. So, without further ado, I guess let's kick it off, Maya, with the big question. So, taking it right back to the beginning, how did your journey down the Bitcoin rabbit hole start?
So actually, it was a friend of mine, Ed. He told me about Bitcoin in 2012. I read the white paper, and as a kid, I always had a fascination with math. It was my favorite, course in high school, and I just fell in love with the white paper. And, just reflecting on the 2008 crisis, it made complete sense. Um, but it was still early days. So I wanted to see where it was heading, and I had my own struggles at the time. So just wanted to see where it headed, how it would grow. Kept an eye on the space. I think in 2014, there was this Telegram group called Whirlpool, which was a Bitcoin only group. You had Charlie Shrem in there. You had Charlie Lee came in from time to time. Phil Potter from Bitfinex, and I think Samson a couple of times I saw him posting as well. So you had this Bitcoin only group with a bunch of toxic maxis constantly raving on about Bitcoin. And I kept following. And then when WikiLeaks, their accounts got frozen and they started accepting donations in Bitcoin. And that was basically for me proof of concept. This cannot be stopped by a government. This cannot, they cannot prevent something as big as WikiLeaks from receiving donations globally. That is when I knew this is going to blow up. This is going to, scale. The network is going to increase significantly. It's gaining significant exposure. Adoption is just unstoppable at this point. And it had been banned by, China so many times already. And the US wanted to ban it. I think it was 2013. Um, so that was when I kind of realized, okay, isn't going anywhere, and it's gonna be something that is going to be the global reserve currency of the world. So I decided I wanted to go into it full time. I had been in my second company for I think it was 7 years at the time. We had money to invest. And I wanted to invest into something that I was passionate about, something that I wanted to spend the rest of my life on. And for me, that was Bitcoin. And it was the intersection of, technology. As a kid, I think since I was 12 years old, I'd always followed the development of technology, tech stocks. I grew up with, my dad developing one of the main computer companies in this country. So I grew up around PCs, playing with hardware and software. And for me, this was the intersection of two things I love: one, finance, math, and technology, or three things I love. Yeah. Well, finance a little less actually, but math and math and tech primarily. But finance intersects, especially the tech and stocks and just following stocks. At the time, I wasn't aware exactly of how capital markets function, so I started to do more research because that is where I saw, opportunity and hurdles in our economy here. Um, just out of my businesses and my experiences, I saw that companies in the US and internationally were raising capital, just based off of a couple of 100K revenue. And I'd done more than that with my first company. My second company, it was bootstrapped, just with, I think it was 6K of investment just out of my savings.
Wow.
And we, yeah, and we reached 1.2 million in revenue in the first year, and scaled that from 1.2 to 5.8 within the first 3 years. So we had to scale very rapidly. And we were, low overhead, a 3-person team. So how do you scale a business with the banks here in Suriname asking 18% interest, right?
Wow.
And we, yeah, exactly. And so it's actually an infrastructure company. So we build roads, dams, dikes, channels, port development, for example. And it seemed almost impossible to scale with financing locally, because with that 18% interest rate in infrastructure, that is just murder. You're immediately not feasible. You're immediately not competitive anymore. So I was looking for solutions, and I looked at how other countries, how they mitigated risks like these. How did they supplement liquidity to be able to facilitate scaling? Um, and within my own company, I had to solve that through credit from our suppliers. I had to go through the whole song and dance with Dun and Bradstreet, do the whole due diligence process. And that is fine for us as a company, because I happen to have the skill set to be able to complete a process like that and leverage credit from suppliers, but most companies here do not. Um, most CFOs here do not. So for us, it was easy, but for others, it wasn't. So once I started taking that deep dive into the Bitcoin rabbit hole, okay, how can we build a better system than what was created in 2008? How can we build a better system using Bitcoin at its core? So I focused on the capital
Mm.
market in Suriname, and then I started looking at the capital market in the US. Like, okay, how is that structured? How does it work? How does it intersect with other countries, other capital markets? How do foreign investors invest into US companies? Like, how are companies like Airbnb and Google, how did they scale to the massive size that they have today using that capital market infrastructure? And once I dove down that rabbit hole, that's when I saw the opportunity to develop our capital market with Bitcoin at its core. So 2017, I went to Consensus. It was the largest conference at the time, and they had just started shitcoining. It was Justin Sun plastered all over the walls, all throughout the conference at the New York Hilton. And I had dinner with the admins of Whirlpool, and I started, lobbying with these toxic maxis, like, hey guys, Suriname is the perfect place for Bitcoin adoption. We don't have a capital market. We don't have the financial infrastructure. There is no, not every person has a credit card. It's a very low percentage of the population, maybe 1% has a credit card. Our debit cards are not Visa, MasterCard, so you can't use them internationally, and it's only local currency. So it's already a hassle to just transact here, let alone use capital market infrastructure. So it's the perfect greenfield for an economy to be based on a Bitcoin standard.
Yeah.
At the time, I think they didn't understand what it could be. I think it was also too early to 2017. And 2018, I went to Oxford. Um, I already knew everything that they had in the fintech course, but I did it anyway for the credibility to have the certificate and the credentials from Oxford. So I did their fintech and blockchain courses, and then afterward, I was selected to be a part of their fintech lab in 2019. It was their only fintech lab. And I went to Oxford in 2019 with this idea of, at the time, Ouro X. And the idea was just Ouro, gold in Portuguese, and X for exchange. And Bitcoin being
Keep it
digital
simple.
gold. Yeah, exactly, simple. And Bitcoin being digital gold seemed like the perfect name. And how to, like, the idea was similar to what later became a DEX, but basically using the decentralized properties of Bitcoin to enable trading 24/7, and allow international investment to flow into to listed companies was the general idea. So 2018 went to consensus. Sorry, 2018
19.
went to Oxford. Came back to Suriname. Started working with the central bank governor here, and I told him the larger vision on how we, could develop our stock exchange and our capital market with Bitcoin at its core, and how that would, decrease the hurdles and increase access to investments into our country, and how we would be a global innovator. And this was before FTX ever, launched. And he was very supportive. He asked me, "What do you need?" I told him I need a sandbox at the central bank so that we can innovate without boundaries. He facilitated that. He made sure that there was a sandbox at the central bank. We started looking at the legal frameworks that needed to be in place. And we made a strategy on how we could use natural resources such as gold, issue it on Bitcoin, and how we could use Bitcoin as the anchor for facilitating international trade and settlement and investment into the country. Fast forward to 2020, when we had already launched the exchange, we were already up and running. I was keeping it low profile because we didn't want to shitcoin.
Bring too much attention.
Yeah, we didn't want to raise too much attention. We didn't want to shitcoin. We wanted to focus on, Bitcoin being the main asset and the other stocks. And we were gearing up for the launch of the state oil bond issuance of 190 million in January 2020, and went to the central bank with all the directors ready to sign. We already had the letter of intent ready, and like 4 days after he got arrested in a political trial.
Wow.
So that put a significant halt in our activity. And that was in January 2020. So we had elections afterward in May 2020. Then a new government was elected. It took a couple of months for a new central bank governor to be put into place, and a new minister of finance. I believe they took over in August of that year. And in August of that year, I started working with the new minister of finance. I presented the entire plan to the president at cabinet in November 2020. And then the minister of finance basically They were very supportive, said that we'd be, they were going to help facilitate the licensing, and we'd go through the process. So he just asked me to wait until they had the deal with IMF closed. And while waiting for that deal, his son in law murdered his grandson. And then he resigned. So it was a lot of waiting for government for that one license. And in the meantime, my professor at Oxford kept trying to convince me to move to London, to just build a startup from London. But I was adamant about doing it from here because of the lack of infrastructure. I didn't want it to be, you know, um, I didn't want it to face what legacy incumbents have in other countries, and build with that infrastructure, because that is not where innovation was going to take place. I was working with Alpha Point out of New York, who's one of the main suppliers of exchange software, actually, and also a partner in El Salvador. And I had pitched this actually at Consensus to Alpha Point as well. I told them we need to build the new system on Bitcoin, and it shouldn't be a replica of the old system, right? Because that is what they've launched until now. And unfortunately, it didn't materialize. And in 2022, I decided to, well, actually, after a lot of pushback from my professor, I decided to make the leap, head to Switzerland. I had also gotten some personal threats here by the powers that be. So I decided to head to Switzerland, um, and basically there just regroup, um, grow my network. I reached out to the same Whirlpool admins. They told me just get your ass to Lugano, and we'll refocus here. And then I went to Plan B, where I met my current investor and main supporter. And he just literally told me, Maya, you have a mind that is, 0.001% or less of the world, with the technical understanding you have, the capital market understanding you have, and the understanding you have of Bitcoin and its technology and how it can be applied. So just grow from that. Forget about AutoX and Suriname for a minute. Take time to regroup, and maybe in a year we'll be working on something completely different. So fast forward 2023, last year. In January, I went to WEF with my professor from Oxford, thinking I could orange pill WEF. That was okay, I'm going to go to WEF, I'm going to orange pill WEF. And that is basically where the REIT, something that was actually on I think it was 2020. We actually had 2023 on the roadmap, I think, which is ironic. So that is where the REIT actually started to take life again, because I pitched it there. I had pitched it to my professor 100 times before. I pitched it to other people 100 times before, but they weren't really getting it. But when I pitched it to him at WEF, he completely understood what I wanted to build. And then he saw the opportunity. So he started to support me, and I joined his venture studio. And he was pro having it be Bitcoin only, because I was adamant about that. I told him we need to be Bitcoin only. This needs to be built on Bitcoin, nothing else.
No ERC20 tokens, please.
No ERC20 tokens. And he actually was pushing for me to work with Hedera. So I had some meetings with Hedera, met with them also in Davos, and they offered us 10 million in a grant, actually, to build it on Hedera. And yeah, he and I got, we didn't agree. We didn't see eye to eye on the vision and the execution and the strategy, because, he felt like I needed to just build on Hedera, and I felt like I didn't want to compromise my integrity by building on Hedera. I didn't want to go with big tech, right? Because Google is, it's one of the members in Hedera. and not just Google, LG. It's all big tech almost in there. I was adamant about building on Bitcoin, so we decided to part ways. And it took me a little bit longer to raise seed capital and find a team, especially a chief technical officer that understands.
Mm.
So I took all of 2023 basically just to build, incorporation, building the team, going through the legalities and complexities with our lawyers, making sure that the financial structure that I had in my head, sorry, the capital market infrastructure, that was also compliant and legal, or we could execute it compliantly and
Yeah.
legally, still using Bitcoin. And in November, I think, no, it was a couple of months after all of that happened, actually, that I met Ralph. Well, I had met him previously, actually. He's a Dutch node runner. I'm also a Dutch node runner. And I asked him after he finished with the Orange Pill app, designing the UE and the UX. I asked him if he would join me at Daedalus to help develop Resin, the real estate investment trust, the Bitcoin real estate investment trust. And once he joined, he introduced me to Jury, who I'd already met at all the previous conferences, but I had no idea what his background was. He was, at the conferences, he just said he makes BTC clocks, or Bitcoin clocks. Um, but apparently, he had already spent 8 years working at the largest bank in the Netherlands, built their blockchain department, had done more than 70 projects, and wanted to also build on Bitcoin and fix mortgages and build new solutions that weren't debt instruments, and had just quit actually that last year at the bank. So everything was aligned. We had a lot of synergy. We wanted to build the same thing, and we had all been working towards the same point. So it's crazy how that just how everything just fell into place.
The stars aligned.
Exactly. The stars aligned. And at a certain point, everything just started working. We started working together. They came here to Suriname. We spent New Year's together after having already worked together for a few months. Um, Jury actually came back in March. We've been working together as a team. It's beautiful to be able to work together with toxic maxis,
Yeah.
because that's exactly what node runners are. It's just a toxic maxi group, like the ultimate toxic maxi group in the Netherlands. And it was just an amazing ride until now. And we just recently signed with Digital. We're building on Liquid and on Noster. We're integrating Lightning. So we're taking, oh, my cat, sorry. we're
No
taking
worries.
Yeah, we're taking all of the best properties of where Bitcoin development is at currently and where we think it's heading. And we're building Resin using, the latest tech and what we think is the best approach. And so I'm going on and on. Do you have any questions? I'm
No,
sorry.
no, it was, well, this podcast is all about storytelling. So I think you hit it on the nail. Um,
Okay.
and,
All
and,
right,
and
great.
I mean, I just wanted to kind of intersect and kind of bring up the point of which you said kind of the perfect timing. And I talk about this on a few episodes. I kind of say, if you really want to achieve great things, you need three things. You need the right time, the right people, and the right place. And this is exactly what you have happened to you. May that minister have not been arrested. You'd still been in Suriname pushing the stuff kind of with the government infrastructure, and then kind of all the hurdles that happened that kind of the average person would say, you know what, like, let me just give up on this. I'm not going to get anywhere. But like the passion and commitment, to keep on trying, moving forward, seeing how you could do it, then kind of, as I mentioned, the stars align and magic happens. And as you said, kind of that feeling of working with people that are on the same frequency wavelength with you, it's a beautiful thing. I think that's what all humans should strive to, get away from that 9 to 5 tedious job of just being essentially a number in the system to working with beautiful minds and building a better future, instead of nagging in person or on Twitter like how terrible everything is, everything's getting more expensive, but you're not really doing anything to change it, right? So it's a fascinating story.
Yeah, it's been difficult. Like, and it has well, actually I didn't even cover the fact I went to El Salvador in 2021 too. After Bukele announced that he was making Bitcoin legal tender, I went to adopting Bitcoin, to lobby for the same thing. Like, hey, we need Bitcoin as legal tender in Suriname. We need this in Suriname. I need the Bitcoin community to come there too and take over. Um, and afterward, it was actually Daniel Wingham that sent me the link to 21.world. Their GG's, well, actually, yeah, their GG and Dennis and everyone from Einen Swansach. They were taking the lessons they learned from Einen Swansach and creating 21.world for it to be able to spread globally. And when I first saw the website, it was, the meme from Satoshi kissing, and it's spreading throughout the world. So the objective was to color the world orange. And it was adamant about getting Suriname orange and getting the Netherlands orange. So I forked it, started 21, which is the Dutch variant of 21. And with that, I thought, you know what, I'm just gonna contribute as much as I can to helping support Bitcoin adoption. So I took all of my savings. I tried to go to every conference where I could contribute. And we had booths, at BTC Prague, at Riga. We had booths in Lugano, at Bitcoin Amsterdam. And I just helped, manage or organize those booths. I helped organize a side event at all of the conferences. So there was a 21.world party at all of the events. Helped organize that with the team. And I basically just went from conference to conference. I spoke also at multiple conferences about community building, about my vision for Suriname, and about my vision for Bitcoin. And going through to all, it was very exhausting, by the way, back to back to back
Yeah.
to back. Yeah, and I was on a budget, so I had to drive sometimes like 22 hours from one conference to get to the next one. So it was pretty draining. And it was also a bit disheartening, to be honest, because I hadn't really been active on Twitter for years because of just focusing on keeping the businesses alive here, and making sure that my team here was taken care of and that the businesses didn't go under, facing COVID and just economic crises in general. So I hadn't been active on Twitter, only on Telegram in Whirlpool. And I got back to these conferences, and you get a sense of what the state of the industry is, where everything's heading, what they're focusing on. And I don't know, to me it felt like a lot of internal politics, a lot of competition in between Bitcoiners, a lot of infighting, and it just wasn't what I was expecting. I was expecting Bitcoiners to, support each other and not be fighting over like who's building the 10th cool wallet. Like, it to me, wallets is something that should have been finished like 5 years ago, right? And it should be user friendly and easy, and it shouldn't take like the development of 500 to be able to get to a point where you're like, okay, this is ready for mass adoption. And I felt like there wasn't enough solving real world problems and building that system that Bitcoin was intended for in 2009 when Satoshi launched it. I felt like there weren't enough companies like building the next iteration of what a new system would be. And I felt with just Resin, REIT, the Bitcoin REIT with Daedalus, we had a specific focus on that. And also, like, too many companies focused on building IP, like which is to me just astonishing. Like, how can you be so focused on building intellectual property and not focusing on building open source or as open source as possible for free, right? You shouldn't be charging me for it either. When Bitcoin was built in that way. So I thought,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, it's hard to scale. For example, a wallet, the fees are, you need to keep them super low or make it almost negligible, basically, because you're building simply a custodial solution on Bitcoin. They can basically be replaced with paper, right? If you think about it.
True.
Yeah, your multi-million-dollar startup can be replaced with paper. So none of these business models really made sense to me. Like, how can you? And it is a complexity that a lot of tech development companies in the space still face, right? How do you scale a business, or how do you make a business model sound and revenue or like profitable?
Cash flow positive. Yeah.
Yeah, cash flow positive. If you need to be open source, right? It's a difficult thing to do. So I looked at our model where the source of revenue, where's the yield coming from? The yield is coming from us just being a profitable business. The fact that we develop open source technology and contribute to the space, and that we at scale can contribute a lot more to open source technology development and contribute a lot more to the ecosystem. That's a nice to have. It's a good plus, right? It is for us. It supports our values as toxic maxis, that we can be more open source and that we can share more with the community and that we can use open source technology and leverage it, and build on Nostr, build on using Bitcoin, integrate Bitcoin, and integrate Lightning, and that we can support companies that are developing on Lightning. But it's not where we generate our profits from. Profits are generated through the REIT, right? And we take the similar to MicroStrategy, which is just basically he issues shares, buys Bitcoin with it. Yeah, literally, that's what they do.
The secret formula.
Yeah, exactly. It's a good formula, right? Where we have a similar model with the REIT. We're supercharging a traditional REIT, adding Bitcoin to the mix, which makes the return on investment over time better than just investing into real estate. And I truly believe that this will not just empower people, because now you don't need a down payment. You can just, in a rent to own model, you're buying equity into the property after the REIT has purchased it. You don't have debt anymore. You're just building wealth, right? So it solves the problem of needing debt, needing a down payment, and it increases access, not just on the user side, but also on the investor side, right? Because to be able to invest into a traditional REIT, you also need a significant amount of capital. In a country where people earn 175 US on average, they don't have the money to pile into a traditional REIT. They don't have the money to be able to afford a down payment, what the banks here want. They don't have the money to afford 12 to 18% interest rates. And that is true for 120 million people throughout Latin America, right? We're a continent with 600 million plus people. 120 million of those people cannot do not
Are
have
locked out.
access to a mortgage. Yes, you're locked out of the traditional financial system. Period. And this is hard for people in the US or people in Europe to understand because they take the things that they have daily so much for granted. And there's a
Mm.
lot of keyboard warriors on Twitter, that love to talk about, yes, Bitcoin maximalism, and even talking about real estate is haram, because how can you be talking about real estate because Bitcoin is a better investment? Like, I'm sorry. We're taking Bitcoin, we're taking the best properties of Bitcoin, and we're solving real life issues for people. Because in the Netherlands, they can send a tikkie, or you can send money freely from bank account to bank account. Here we have to wait 3 days just to do a regular
Yeah.
bank transfer from one person to the other. And they cannot do euros and US dollars. They can only do SRDs. And that is the same in a lot of countries all throughout Latin America. So what the advantages that people have on the day to day, we do not have that here. And Bitcoin fixes it, but Bitcoin doesn't fix their mortgage for them. They still need to have a relationship with the bank if they ever want to be able to buy a home. So as long as we don't fix that main problem, Bitcoiners have a big mouth, but I'm pretty sure that 90% of us still have a mortgage, right? So we're
Yeah.
still in debt to the bank. That same system that for over a decade now we want to get out of. So how are you going to opt out of a system if there is no better alternative? And simply just allowing the purchase of a property in Bitcoin, that is not enough. Simply allowing to use your Bitcoin as collateral, that is not enough, because not everyone has 500K just lying
Lying
around to
down.
be able to buy, to buy their house. Otherwise, they wouldn't have a mortgage in the first place, right?
True.
So just
Very true.
exactly. So simply using Bitcoin as collateral, and that is something that I saw at some of the conferences. There are, I think, two companies that allow Bitcoin as collateral and allow the purchase of a real estate asset using Bitcoin. That does not solve the problem for the masses, right? And it doesn't even solve the problem for us as Bitcoiners, because I don't have a couple of 100K lying around, to use as collateral in Bitcoin to be able to purchase a real estate asset and just lock it or park it. So that I didn't see that as a solution, but it actually just kind of enforced what I was already thinking, and that is that this is a unique approach and a unique solution that nobody else has yet brought to market. So that gives us an advantage as well, bringing it to market, making sure that it's open source, that it can be, we can just scale it to multiple jurisdictions, partner up with anyone that wants to use the technology and implement it in their jurisdiction. And we can build a platform for Bitcoiners to actually solve one of their main, whether you're a toxic maximalist, a pleb, doesn't matter where you are on the spectrum, how much Bitcoin you own, even if you only own 100 Satoshis, this can be a solution for you to opt out of the system, right? And I see this, especially as this epoch is the epoch where you have this is where we win. This is the
Yeah.
epoch where we win, and I see this as one of the ways that helps us win. I see Fedi as a solution for users that aren't as tech savvy, that are not going to run their own node, that can't deal with the complexities of managing or balancing channels on Lightning. I think Fedi is something that is very good for communities.
Accelerating it.
Exactly, to accelerate Bitcoin adoption. And I see our solution as complementary. We're also looking at launching it as a Fedi mod. And I see our solution as an intersection between Nostr, Fedimint, Bitcoin, Lightning, and Liquid in solving a real world problem. right?
Mm.
Not for the top 1%, not just for a select few, not just for capital heavy investors, but for actual people. And I think this is one of the solutions that will help Bitcoin scale globally at a rapid pace. I mean, just look at how Airbnb scaled, just look at how Uber
Yeah.
scaled, right? I also looked at how just throughout my entire journey, the last 6 years, trying to launch a massive scalable startup. Only like my altruism, like it completely lives in Resin. Like it's that the whole structure of it, right? Because a REIT inherently 90% of the profits have to go back to the shareholders. If we're all shareholders, if
We're
only
all profiting from
10%
it.
can, exactly, we're all profiting for it. So from it. So it is for the community in essence. Like it by creation, by design, it is already community focused. So we're all benefiting from it. And as I really think that this is something Bitcoin is about a trillion market cap at the moment, right? Real estate
Yeah.
is a $600 trillion asset class, the largest asset class. And I see just us absorbing all of that monetary value that is in fiat right now, converting it into a Bitcoin standard. I see real estate going back to its utility, right? So back to its utility value instead of having it be overly speculated into, it being a, well, basically it's a store of value almost, but a very poor one, because just look at the wealth gap, right?
Mm.
Look at the wealth gap in the US, look at the wealth gap in Europe, look at the wealth gap everywhere in the world. Basically it is those that have more resources that invest more. Blackstone owns, I think it was last I read, 70% of the assets in the US, which is
Crazy.
insane. It's crazy, right? So it is all flowing back to that top 1% instead of working for the people. So I see real estate going back to that utility value. Shelter is one of, us as humans, one of our basic needs.
Of
We need
course.
shelter. You need shelter for your family. We can talk about Bitcoiners having babies all day, but you want your baby to have a roof over its head, right? So we're not going to
Yeah.
all be living in boxes when we opt out of the system. So I see this as a solution where it's community focused, it's open source, the entire community can contribute to it. We can all benefit from it. We can invest into commercial properties. We can refinance existing mortgages. We can all completely opt out of the system now. And
Mm.
it's taken a while, but we're finally here and we're finally, ready to build, and we're building with, and a lot of the best minds in the space as well. And over the next couple of weeks, there will be more information coming out. We'll, gradually keep launching more and more as
Be
we
leaking
progress.
out more and more developments.
Yes, leaking out more and more developments and more about the structure, how it works, how it works to the benefit of all of us, and keeping in line with especially I'm sorry, people hate the word, or some people hate the word toxic maxi, but I think it's an ideology, right?
Yeah.
It's not a cult. It's, or yeah, we might be a little bit of a cult, or a movement. It's a movement.
It's the right cult. No,
It's the
not all
right. It's
cults
the
need to be
right.
bad.
Exactly. It's the right mindset. And it's making sure that we don't have, bad actors in the space. I think that is one of the main and key takeaways, because there's been a lot of fighting on Twitter the last couple of weeks about, I don't want to bullshit technology being built on Bitcoin, such as runes and ordinals and all that crap. But I think it doesn't help. I think we should be focusing on building. And if all of the talent that is Bitcoin focuses on building actual real world applications that solve real world problems, because I see this, I see this as, okay, we have a pilot project in Suriname. It's a commercial development next to the shore base. It's going to generate significant revenue that's going to flow back to the community. We can in the future, we can diversify into other real estate assets. We can build medical hubs. We can hospitals. We can invest into infrastructure. We can
Schools,
diversify
so
into,
many
yes,
things.
exactly, airports, ports, name it, right? We can diversify into so much. And instead of it having be owned by a select few, or having it be state controlled or state owned, now actually having profits from it flowing directly to the community, directly to the people. So I see
Yeah.
it as part of the new system. I hope that other Bitcoin companies, start focusing not just on building the next shiny thing, or the next, what they think is important for yeah, like I think competition in this space. I hope that they start focusing on solving more real world problems and building like the Bitcoin equivalent of an Uber, or the Bitcoin equivalent of other massive companies out there. Or it doesn't mean not everything needs to be built on Bitcoin either. Look at
True.
Nostr. Nostr is a decentralized protocol for communication, and actually not just communication. It solves the problem that we've been having with data with big tech. We need more of that. We need more open source solutions that are focused on Web 5, and we need to shift focus away from Web 3 and stop fighting all of these Web 3 assholes that keep. I'm sorry, I keep cussing. All of this
It's okay.
Web 3.
It's a PG-18 podcast, so it's fine.
Okay, great. Yeah. So I think we need to focus less on all of this Web 3 nonsense that is porting itself onto Bitcoin, and maintain focus on what we're doing. Because I think Ben Ark said it today, right? We're focusing on building. We're focusing on not battling each other, but in this epoch, the system. Me running for president, I'm also a voice for, I'm not a supporter of big tech. I'm not a supporter of the centralization, what happened on the internet, and the U.S. failing to enforce antitrust regulation on actors like Google and Amazon and Facebook and
Oh, you saw what happened to
Instagram.
Samurai Wallet just yesterday, right? With the DOG just arresting co-founders for bogus
Exactly.
allegations of money laundering and stuff. Yet they're money laundering in the trillions every month, and that's fine.
Exactly. Like the big bank CEOs get a slap on the wrist, open source developers get locked up. It makes zero sense to me. And I think, of course, to be realistic, there's a fine line between open source development and actively encouraging, bad actors and criminals to use your services. But there's still no room almost globally, it looks like, right? The way regulation is going, right? The way regulation is going in Europe, the way regulation is going in the US, there's almost no room for open source development to just thrive.
Yeah.
So aside from just making Bitcoin the unit of account in Suriname, and building the capital market, with Bitcoin at its core, capital market, just efficient resource allocation, let's call it that, and making sure that wealth is evenly distributed and that people can grow together and that we can all grow together. Replacing the SRD with Bitcoin, so that salaries are denominated in satoshis. When you go to the grocery store, it'll have to be satoshis. That is
full unit of account.
Full unit of account. That is the main objective. But aside from that, also being a facilitator for open source development. And then I mean true open source development, supporting protocols like Nostr, making sure that it replaces things like Facebook. Like for in my country, for example, right? Facebook for over a decade now. Jesus, decades now. I'm old.
Decades, yeah.
Yes, for decades now, Google and Facebook have been generating revenue from local companies. Marketing budgets are spent on Facebook and Google advertising, right? And that flows back to the US. And we're kept on these platforms, we're kept on these big tech systems, and they use our data to increase their profitability, and they've grown significantly. But these revenues should be flowing to local companies, to local media companies on a decentralized standard where our data is not used in some algorithm to optimize viewership or increase dependency of our children, right?
To sell to the same person that's paying for it. The irony, right?
The irony, it's insane. It is insane. So I want to make sure that we have space for companies that want to build open source technology. We have a small population, 600,000. Use us as your launch pad, your pilot. Build your open source solution, launch it for the world, and we will facilitate the regulatory frameworks and the facilities for you to be able to do it. That is my vision for at least from a technology perspective for Suriname. Just make sure that everything is in place for developers to freely innovate. And then I want to focus on the larger vision, because I have a vision for Latin America. I feel like the world is getting very dystopic. And I feel like in 2024, we shouldn't have, that same system that is just a machine optimizing for war and actually incentivizing war. We should be focusing on a future that is boundless, right? Focused on solving real world problems. We have enough resources in the world to solve real world problems. And I think Latin America in particular, the global South, Latin America and Africa, we're going to be the innovators. We're going to be the leaders. We're going to have the most growth, emerging markets, right? And I see a future for Latin America where you have Hyperloop, something that failed in the US simply because of incumbents. Hyperloop from Mexico all the way then through the North Coast back to Brazil and all the way south to Argentina. And then I see people moving freely within hours from each country to the other, and trade happening between these countries, something that is not happening now. We trade primarily with Europe or with the UK or with the US, right? All of these countries, like little islands, we trade with the powers that be instead of optimizing for trade regionally. So I see a more regional focus. I see us collaborating more as leaders on a global stage, being a voice against what's happening in the rest of the world in terms of technology development, us advancing as a society, how the world is dealing with its resources and allocating of resources to solving major problems like poverty and hunger in other continents. With the amount of resources we have, why is Africa
there's
still
no need for that?
Exactly, there's no need. And in a world with Bitcoin as money, as the global reserve currency, what are we working towards? And I want to be working towards something. And it's funny because I was explaining this to one of my team members and laying out the vision. And he's like, "Yeah, but that sounds like a utopia." And I'm like, "What do you want the future? What do you want the future to be? Dystopia, right? But it's so embedded in our minds because of the news, because of the way the world is going, because of the decisions that
all the programming happening everywhere.
Exactly. And the decisions that global leaders are making, it makes zero sense. but it is happening. So it's just kind of been embedded in our minds that where the future is heading. But I feel like that's not a future that I want for my children or my grandchildren. I
Of
want a
course.
future with, I don't know, flying cars and multi-planetary species. Or I'd like to see a future where the whole planet looks like Singapore. Okay, maybe a
Yeah.
little bit more green, but develop.
True.
And no more war. There's no reason in 2024 to still have. We should be using nuclear for energy. We should be
Yeah.
using nuclear to get off of fossil fuels and to focus on optimizing society and building a better society, not launching rockets at each other, right? And that is a future I envision, and that's a future I want to build towards and work towards. Um, so I'm laying the foundation here in Suriname and building a blueprint that I hope can influence and affect the rest of the world. Um, so it's going to be an
Amazing.
interesting year. It's going to be an interesting year, especially
Well,
combining both.
sorry?
Especially combining both. Like
Yeah.
the resin, Daedalus, and running in the elections. It's going to be an interesting year.
You've got plenty of things on your plate. I mean, each thing separate is an ambitious one, but putting three of them all at once, it's, I mean, kudos to you,
Actually,
Maya.
I forgot to add something. So Suriname is in an MIT program, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, so the #1 innovation university in the world. We're in their REIT program. It's a regional acceleration, entrepreneurship acceleration program. They took the Silicon Valley framework and implemented it in over 70 countries in the world, including Singapore, London, Dubai, Brazil right next door, and Mexico currently. So we're in cohort 10. And we're developing the innovation-driven entrepreneurship ecosystem in Suriname, but on a Bitcoin standard. So for
Amazing.
me, it's like a sly roundabout way to kind of Trojan horse MIT and force them to look back into Bitcoin,
Nice.
and have all of this development kind of happen, in under their nose, and forcing the U.S. and the #1 university in the world to look at the latest developments in Bitcoin, because it is significant and it is going to change the world. And I feel like this is a way that we're kind of forcing them to look at how,
Take it
how I
serious.
envision, and get serious, and how this capital market is going to be developed, how real estate development is going to change, how the energy transition strategy is being optimized by adding Bitcoin into the mix on OTEC, on nuclear development. The incentives are changing, and how Bitcoin is changing those incentives, right? Right now, you no longer look at the country and say, okay, we need 400 megawatt or 500 megawatt, so we need to build a dam and you have excess capacity. No, we're looking at, okay, we can build nuclear reactors modular, we can focus on renewables, and we can look at 1200 megawatts, 1300 megawatts, and supplement it with a Bitcoin strategy for mining for the country. So
Yeah.
I think it's a beautiful combination, specifically with the strategy that we have on how to develop this country with the current assets that we have right now, because we do have a massive offshore oil reservoir that's heading into exploitation. So we're going to be a global leader in oil. It's estimated that we have more oil than Qatar. But
Wow.
we looked at the royalties and resources that we have now, that we're receiving as a country right now, and how we can shift the economy from what it is right now, basically just subsidizing government, subsidizing government employees, because half of our working population now works for government. but basically completely shifting that model from a debt system to on a system on a Bitcoin standard, and having that development, with with MIT giving us input in terms of our strategy and vision, and how we develop this country, how we develop that innovation ecosystem, and then also forcing it to be open source, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's a culmination of, I think, now a decade of work coming into play, all aligning, the stars are aligning, and just rolling it out over the next year, and being a voice for change, and then hopefully a solution that the rest of the world can replicate.
Yeah, I was gonna say that like there's so many other countries, especially third world countries that have been exploited for generations and hundreds of years, that now kind of with Bitcoin it's this glimmer of hope that nation states can take control back and build the future that they want to build. And more importantly, as you said, it needs to be open source. I totally agree. I find it also a very hypocritical, a lot of Bitcoin companies, fighting on the IP, this is mine and everything, this is my little baby. Whereas
Yeah,
what you're utilizing is open source. Like Satoshi gave us like the most beautiful thing in the world and he just walked away from it. Like,
exactly.
why not follow that, that good heart and build something that other people can utilize and build further? So,
Exactly.
and I think also you mentioned kind of my like going to all these conferences last year and the year before, and kind of being disappointed in what you saw. And especially last year we had this whole hypocrisy with the ordinals and these NFTs coming to Bitcoin, which is very dumb. Like we can do so many more things to help people's lives and impact them than be trading pointless JPEGs for Bitcoin, which we don't need that noise. If you like noise, there's a whole crypto casino that you can go to, the Solanas, the Ethereums, the Trons, and gamble your money away there. But with Bitcoin, there's so many things that can be built in it. So like I really admire all the things that you're building, man. And to be honest, I'm really happy I got you on the podcast, because I've come across you on some other podcasts, and I've been following you for some time on Twitter. But like now, what you like rolled out the grand scheme of things that you're building, and how impactful 2024 is going to be. I'm super happy we got the chance to speak now before everything rolls out, and then oh my, I would love to have you back in 2025 and see how things are developing, because yeah, I also agree this fifth epoch that we've just entered into, things are definitely going to be different. I like the saying, this time it's different, but I think this time it is going to be different. And if we don't do it now, when are we going to do it? When people say, Bitcoin's not worth anything, it's not backed by anything, it's like, hey, like, look what Bitcoin's done in the last decade, and like what we've achieved in these just 15 years. When you zoom out and look at the macro, it's like it's a bleep in the timeline of humanity, and we're already $1 trillion asset, and we're going next. Well, we're already beaten silver. We're gonna smash gold very, very soon, and then we're gonna be eaten away from the real estate and kind of stock market asset class, which I think, talking about the real bubble, like the stocks and the real estate, how it's just like exploded. And especially now, like younger generations, I'm still in the millennial bracket, but like Gen Zs, which most people don't know, Gen Zs they're the biggest generation in the world right now. And those guys are fully locked out from buying a studio, let alone a house or a 3-4 bedroom flat. And that needs to change. That's super unhealthy, and kind of how our parents and grandparents, had it easy. They bought their house of their dreams, they had their 2 cars, they went on crazy vacations. Nowadays, you're kind of, Gen Zs and millennials are working 2-3 jobs just to make ends meet, to pay your rent or your mortgage.
Exactly.
And that is not a healthy way to go. And, with all these developments that we have and all these tools that are, lying in front of our nose, instead of us focusing and building, like you said, throwing it away and speculating away, what money am I going to put my money on next month's token? It's crazy. And then looking at kind of countries, I think, a great point you brought up in 2024 that we're still bombing each other to fight over resources and territories and religious rights is ridiculous. Like we as a human species, if we got together like some Bitcoiners are, and building a better future, I mean, this world, we would be long time ago, exploring other planets and perhaps even other galaxies. You mentioned flying cars, Maya. I remember when I was a kid, so to say, a child, I always kind of 2020 was to me this big year. I was always thinking we're gonna have flying cars and it's gonna be like super future. And then we come to
Exactly.
2020 and pandemic hits and I need to wear a mask to go buy groceries and be sending messages to take my dog for a walk. It was like, where did we go
Yeah.
wrong? Like
Yeah.
pretty crazy. So, I'm also like a big believer and very optimist for the future. A lot of people are saying where's the world going? There's no hope and stuff. Well, I tell to all those people, study Bitcoin, because the more you study Bitcoin, you will see there is hope, and you can incorporate that hope into building the world you want to see. So I'm still hopeful. The future is bright, and all good things take time. You mentioned my like how you're exhausted and things are taking much longer than you anticipated, but all good things take time, and take a lot of work and dedication. So in time, things will work out. And in time, in the future, these kind of bureaucrats and these, corrupt people at the top, which have just been milking away from society, are eventually going to die out. And their younger generations, which hopefully have a better heart and are semi-orange pilled, will, kind of make it easier for us to initiate the change that we want to make. And, it's life moves very fast.
Thank you for the kind words as well.
Yeah, no, it's amazing because I love having these conversations which are about kind of impacting the world and building something better than just talking about. I don't want to downgrade any other talks I had, but like as I mentioned, these JPEGs and whatnot, and just there's my dog entering the conversation. Essentially, doing a real impact that can fix big problems. And the one you're tackling with real estate is a huge one because, as I mentioned, like, and I totally agree, it's a human right to have a shelter for us, to have food and clothes. Those are not things that should be kind of wants, they are needs. And the current system that we have, the legacy system, as we call it, is based on debt, and we don't need this debt. We need to have a true free markets, not the ones that are portrayed in the business books that they teach today. Because I studied business management in my uni courses, and it was a whole bogus Keynesian economics about every 10 years we go through a bust and boom and bust, and then how inflation is normal. Like, how is inflation normal? The fact that your money's melting away, that's normal. Like, and I was always questioning. I was like, this is not right. And I remember early days of my business studies, the lecture in I studied actually in London. You were referencing London, and they asked us in one of the early lectures, what is the number one priority of a business? And most people in the early days, I mean, in the first lectures, they're kind of shy. And I was like sitting front row, putting up my hand, and he goes, yeah, Gigi, what's the number one priority? And I go, to give the best service to the customers. And he said, no. And I'm like, how is that not the number one priority? He goes, the number one priority is to make a profit so that the shareholders are happy. I'm like, well, holy shit, that's why the world is so, sorry for my French, shitty, because companies are working about making a profit and scamming the customer instead of delivering a product or a service to help out, and be useful. So, it's no wonder the world is the way it is. But, I do believe there are good hearts and souls, such as yourself and other people that are building the better future. And sooner or later, we are going to win. The Gandhi's quote, and I think we are in this fight stage now. The laugh is no longer here. The fight time is here. It'll be hopefully a peaceful revolution, because in this revolution, we don't need no bullets. All we need is some education. I always tell people it costs $0 to study Bitcoin. Just putting your own, no pun intended, proof of work, study it, try out different things. What you mentioned with Ben Ark, we actually had Ben Ark on the show a few months ago, and what he's built with Ellen Bits, it's fantastic, and how many how Noster came out of it, and who knows what other things are coming out of it. It's just, you no longer need the computer science degree to go and build your use case. There's so many things, or Fediment, as you referenced as well, Maya. Like, there's so many things that you can just go and use off the shelf and dabble and make your own little sandbox. Doesn't have to be as huge as Maya's case with revamping real estate and mortgages. It can be a simple, I don't know, whatever, whatever your passion is. And that's, I think, an important factor, that people should focus on their passions. Because if you're working on something that you're passionate about, it doesn't feel like work. When I come from an entrepreneurial family, essentially before entrepreneurship, we were all tradesmen, right? Before the term came around. And my father did so many different things. He always had many different businesses that he was changing. And growing up, I was always asking my dad, I said, like, Dad, how do you know, like, what should I do in the future? And he said, son, do something that you love, because if you do what you love, you won't work a day in your life. And it took me a whole lot of years for that to click in. I said, what you mean? Like, I'm still working. Like, how am I not working? But then, the more I'm kind of focusing on Bitcoin, and yeah, it's just a podcast, I truly believe, storytelling and getting through to people's minds is a powerful thing. Because, if more people would focus about giving something back to humanity, we would be in a much better place. So, the podcast is my platform to fully go do what I love. But who knows what comes down the line, and being consistent with something, dedicated, passionate, and working hard, sky's the limit. It's, you
Completely
decide
agree.
how far you want to take it.
Yeah, completely agree.
So I guess, I had, as I said, I had a few backup questions, so to say, lined up, but those just went way out the window. Because Maya, you took us on one hell of a journey on how you got started, where you are, and where you want to be. And I found it incredibly interesting and super inspiring, and I'm sure the listeners did as well. My only kind of question that I want to bring up, take the opportunity, since we're doing the pod today, is how did the presidential kind of your candidacy come around? Did somebody push you to do it, or you want to do it, and like, you have so many things going on? How does that come into your playbook?
So friends have always asked me to do it, but that's ever since I was in my early 20s. Friends always asked me, just because of my political views and my views on development and how to develop the economy in the country. In the last 6 years, several political parties have asked me or tried to recruit me, but I was very anti-politics. As a pure toxic max, you're very anti-government. You want the least amount of government as possible involved in day-to-day life. But last year, Samson came here with Samson Mao with Gen
Yeah.
3, and he also told me, like, you just need to run. And I sat with it in my head for, I think, a month or two afterward, after he said that. And there kept coming, like, with one scandal after the other, from our current president and from our current government. And the amount of people just don't have any hope anymore, and there's no hope for the next elections. None of these political parties have a plan on how to actually tackle the economy and develop this country. So it started to weigh on me. I started to evaluate whether I was willing to make the sacrifice, to my family, the level of security, the amount of scrutiny, and just primarily the loss of privacy, because you're never alone again, almost never alone again. And once you take office, and even in this run, politics is a very dirty game, so it's going to be a dirty fight, and an uphill struggle, definitely. And if I wanted to do that, and I went through the process last year, and ultimately decided, what, the amount of love that I have for my country, the amount of change I want to achieve in the world, and the amount of, just everything that I stand for, everything that I want to achieve, and everything I want to help make happen for the future, I need to do this, not just for my country, but for everything I want to do for the world. So I kind of started to feel like an obligation, that something that I just had to do. So it was Samson that gave me the push, but ultimately I made the decision to, after I had a lot of conversation here with industry leaders and a lot of the technocratic leaders here that want to change, help facilitate change, and want new leadership. After that, I decided, you know what, I have the support. I actually have a shot, and like a realistic shot at winning against my competitors. So I felt like I should. And
Yeah.
that's basically how the decision was made.
It's, I guess sometimes you need to sacrifice some things for the greater good. And like in your case, it's not just kind of for your family or for your country, but as you said, like for humanity at large, and be the example that other people should follow and see. Because I'm sure, if you win and you impose the change that you want to make, the whole Latin America will be looking very closely to the developments, and they will be considering what can we do, to follow suit. And because the El Salvador story was kind of a fascinating one, where this, little island kind of out of nowhere, nobody prior to El Salvador making a legal tender heard about El Salvador, let alone, talked about it and all the engagement that's happening now. And I was always I thought El Salvador is going to be the first domino, and then a few months later, it's going to be another one and another one and another one. And now it's
Yeah,
been
me
kind of like
too.
2 years and it's stalled. And
Yeah.
it's, the question is who's going to be next, and how are we going to progress? And, I would love the fact if you would win, because from everything that we've spoken today, I mean, if things, even half of those things get initiated, wow, like history will be made, and Maya will be in history books. So yeah, I truly, from the bottom of my heart, like, I wish you all the best of luck with, of course, the presidential run, and especially with the projects that you're doing, and Resin now, which, as you said, it sits close in your heart. And I honestly also believe it's the first of its kind use case that the whole world needs. It's not just third world countries, because, even in developed countries, as we said, the Gen Zs and millennials, they cannot afford their mortgages, let alone putting down payments. As you said, nobody has 200, 300,000 just lying around in
Sure.
spare cupboard. So yeah, I think there's a lot of work to do, but you're definitely on the right path. And yeah, and I think with the great people that you're surrounded with, and the beautiful minds, I think, you could really make that change happen that you want to see. And I definitely praise you for it.
Thank you. I really appreciate the support.
So, and yeah, I mean, kind of where can we send our listeners to follow more all the things that you're doing? I guess Daedalus website, but is there anywhere else you want us to redirect the listeners to kind of follow and
I
support?
mean, if they want to follow me and what I'm doing, my Nostr handle is Mia underscore biz. It was my gamer tag, so Mia underscore BZZZZ. But I have my NPub on my X account as well. That's a bit easier. That's Maya PAR25.
Mm-hmm.
And Daedalus is easy to follow. That's Daedalus underscore Labs.
Well, we will link for, because everybody knows with the X pubs, they're a bit lengthy to be naming each character, but we'll definitely include them in the show notes. And yeah, anyway, I would highly urge people, that are listening to follow Maya, support any way we can. And yeah, we would definitely love to have you back in the future, as your and our Bitcoin stories at large progress. And yeah, once again, best of luck with all the big endeavors that you have lined up for the year ahead.
Thank you so much.